I'll rephrase my question a little better. Malaysia, I mean, put it this way, Malaysia's not strapped for malls, okay? But the success of malls is massively polarizing. The good guys, the big guys do really, really well, but at the other end, nobody else can, it doesn't seem to survive. So after doing all the research, it's like, is there like a magic formula? What decides whether a Malaysian mall lives or dies?
Everyone just says that you just have to know your customer. Who lives 5 minutes drive away, 10 minutes drive away, 15 minutes drive away? What do they need? What do they want? It's actually quite fascinating, the consumer studies that go into planning a mall. They really, really go into very, very granular detail on who lives nearby, how much income do they have. The crucial threshold is this: do they earn more than 5,000 ringgit per household? How old are they? What do they like? What is the racial mix, the gender mix? And only with that profile can you then look at sizing a mall, planning the tenant mix, deciding what differentiates your mall from the mall down the road.
Okay.
You're right in that in the Damansara area, there are dozens of malls within 5 minutes drive.
Yeah.
So then why should consumers come to your mall as opposed to the mall that they're used to across the street?
I think all of us here have what they call like mall fatigue, right? Because
Yes.
it seems we cannot turn a corner without a new mall kind of popping up. So with all this competition, and the point that you made in here, which I found very interesting, is that landlords can't just be landlords anymore. They have to be landlords come almost like consumer consultants, where they think when they work with their tenants and say, okay, how do we work together to bring people here?
Yep.
So that's an interesting change. People
It
have
is-
to be this
it
way
is.
now, isn't it?
It's not like the 90s or the 80s anymore where the landlord just sits around and collects rent.
Yeah.
These days, because of the competition, not only competition for tenants but competition for consumers, the landlords are almost like a business partner to their tenants. That's when you see landlords spending lots of money on A&P to drive traffic to the mall. They spend a lot of money on on-ground activity, especially school holidays
That's
at
true.
the mall. They have to drive traffic. There's a saying in the shopping mall business that tenants are not afraid of high rental. Tenants are afraid of no business. Right? So the landlords are now incentivized to drive business for the tenants because a lot of the malls now apply what's called the turnover rental
Principle. So is
model.
that
So they may not pay,
Yeah.
the tenants don't just pay a fixed rental. They may pay a service charge plus a base rental, or they may pay a service charge and a percentage of their gross turnover. So then the landlord is incentivized to really, really work hard for the tenant and make sure the tenant does well as well, because they are paid on what the tenant makes.
Okay, but that seems to apply, I suppose, for the newer guys, because if you are the mid-valleys of the world, the One Utamas of the world, right, you are sitting pretty because people are clamoring to get into you. Does that kind of relationship still apply, or is it more heavy-handed? Well, heavy-sided.
I would say if you have an established mall with strong management, then the power dynamic between the landlord and the tenant isn't that different.
Okay.
The landlord still has some bargaining power, but if you are a new mall in a location that may or may not be good, the tenant really has the upper hand, I feel.
What's the magic bullet to bring them in, or are people just doing a lot more research? Take, for example, Kluang Mall.
Yeah.
Great example that you put in, where they were said for years not to build a mall, it's not enough, but they found differently, didn't they?
They did. Kelong Mall is in a very unique situation. They don't have the same competitive pressures that Klang Valley malls have, because in central Kelong there isn't a big shopping mall.
Yeah.
And I have to qualify that. There are hypermarkets and there are shopping arcades, but that's a slightly different model. Nobody really owns and manages the mall. And managing and owning all the lots in the mall is very important for you to control the tenant mix.
Okay.
So Kelong Mall is unique in that, and they've also found out that there is pent-up consumer demand because the average customer comes to Kelong Mall 7 times a month,
which is actually quite insane.
which is more than you and I go to a mall in a month.
Yeah, that's
correct?
quite true,
Yeah.
because of, there's so many options to choose to. You don't need to be loyal to one. But this graphic that you have showed me very much so that population growth is not catching up with the number of malls. So in the end,
Not at
why
all.
are people still why is people still building? It's no longer build and they will come. That's not
no,
work.
that-
That
that-
doesn't work anymore.
that doesn't apply anymore.
So why is there still building? And after all the research, do you think that there'll be more closures of malls? Definitely.
We won't. I don't think we're seeing the situation that's happening in the States where malls are really closing.
towns, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the early signs of the pressures are beginning to show. If you remember last year, SS2 Mall and BB Plaza closed down for redevelopment. Just last week, as we were finishing up this story, we saw a news item in Penang, Perda City Mall. I think it used to be Aeon Seberang Perai, just suddenly closed down. Are those signs that things are not doing well in retail? I think certainly those are signs that point to how difficult it is for shopping malls to conduct business. Management really has to be on top of the game, or else you'll see a situation where you're open today and you're gone tomorrow.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.